Who knows better than a physician about the process of death and dying in the body? But what about the spiritual side? In this episode, we will talk to a physician who actually studies that.
Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Hello, and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast, where today we radiate comfort with Dr. Adam Rizvi, who is the author of Love Does Not Know Death, Stories of Death, Dying, and the Miracles of True Forgiveness. Now, how often do we find an actual medical doctor who addresses the spiritual side of death and dying? I think you're really going to enjoy this eye-opening interview. I know that he really expanded my mind in many, many different ways. Now, before we get too much further, let me tell you who I am. I'm Christy Clemens Hoffman. I am the host of this show. I am based in the Kansas City area. I am a level 3 QHHT quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, as well as practicing other forms of hypnosis, but I'm also a medium and a spiritual teacher and an author and a podcast host and a Reiki master. So the spiritual side of the body and our mind, I've got that covered. But the physical part of what happens during death is, I just don't know very much. And I really appreciated this opportunity to talk with Dr. Rizvi. Now, before we get too much further into the episode, I do have a few asks of you. First of all, if you like this show, and I hope you do, please share it with your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, anybody who might like uplifting and positive content like this, and show them how to find the show. Now, next, if you would, please subscribe or follow on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, or on YouTube, just subscribe or, hit the notification button. And that way you will be notified when there are new episodes out. Next, if you would give a thumbs up, positive review, whatever it is, wherever you're listening, that really helps a lot. So these are simple things that help other people find us, because the platforms recognize that when we have likes, when we have new visitors, new listeners, when we have downloads, when we have reviews, that it shows there's a generated excitement, there's a buzz, there's people noticing about it. And that really boosts us in the algorithms and helps other people to find us as well. So truly helps. And yeah, a little positive review would not hurt. So thank you if you are willing to do that. Next, if you are in a position to maybe help us out a little financially, that would certainly be welcome. There will be a link in the show notes to donate to the podcast. Now, this podcast is and will always remain free for you to listen to. That is my commitment to you. I do this because I love it. I love talking to people from around the world about ways to live better, to experience life better, to have better health, to have better mental wellness. And I truly do love this. It is a labor of love. And all of the costs to produce it come out of my pocket. So hiring a producer, an editor, hosting, advertising, all of that comes right out of my pocket. If you can kick back maybe $3-5, that would certainly help. Another thing that you might be interested in is my other podcast, which is called Real Life Angel Encounters. Real Life Angel Encounters is exactly what it sounds like. It's real people like you who've had miraculous encounters and are ready to talk about it. And maybe you enjoy that as well. If you like healthy living, the spiritual side of wellness, the metaphysical aspects of being in the human body, you might also enjoy Real Life Angel Encounters, which is also a book. Yes, I turned the first season of the podcast into a best-selling book, available online wherever you find great books. And it's called Real Life Angel Encounters as well. Real people share real stories of miraculous encounters. Now, also, I mentioned this other podcast because it's up for an award. the Storytelling Award from Women Podcasters. And that podcast actually won Best Storytelling Podcast last year, and it's up for another award this year. So don't worry, I will also put the link to vote for that podcast in the description of this show. Why not? Because I can. And it would really mean a lot if you could vote for that podcast. And I bet if you listen to it, you'll probably like it. So that's it. Without further ado, I don't want to hold you up any further. Let's get to the interview with Dr. Rizvi. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast, where today we radiate comfort with Adam. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you, Christy. Doing really well. Thank you so much.
You know, the subject matter that you write about is death and dying. This is near and dear to my heart. Of course, you're an ICU nurse. You see death up close and personal, don't you?
I'm actually a physician, ICU physician, and I do work in the critical care unit. One of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is critically ill patients. And not sure what the mortality rate is. It tends to fluctuate, but it can be anywhere from 20 to 40%, depending on the ICU, depending on the season. So whenever you come into the hospital, and specifically the ICU, there's a very good chance that you're near death's doorstep.
Right. Nobody goes to the ICU because they're feeling great. So these are the final moments for many, many people. So how many deaths have you witnessed in your work?
When I was a fellow in doing critical care fellowship, I probably had seen maybe 50 or so deaths at that point or been present to it. But it was around that time that I started to want to document these deaths. And part of it was to honor the patient because a lot of them were alone and I was the only one with them at that time, me and maybe a nurse. And I just felt that I wanted to capture this precious moment and at least in some way, shape, or form, their life would live on in my memory and in my journal. And so I started to write down everything that happened leading up to a patient's death, their actual death, and then my experience of it afterwards, along with a prayer for them. And I just started accumulating this and I started what I called my death journal. And this now has probably maybe 500 or 600 entries at this point, many hundred.
And so at what point in cataloging and documenting these deaths did you realize that there was something a bit more than just the body coming to a close?
Well, I kind of went into medicine with already being a spiritual practitioner, already meditating on a regular basis, having a deeper sense of life's continuity, if you will. But up until that point, it was largely beliefs and belief systems. I hadn't the experience, the raw experience of seeing death essentially turn into an illusion for me. And what I mean by that is I started to get all these experiences of patients dying and then coming back to share experiences of the afterlife, seeing synchronicity upon synchronicity. For example, large families showing up, being with a loved one who's actively dying for days, and then in the briefest moment when all of them step away to get soda or bathroom break or whatever, that's when they go and they flatline. Such beyond synchronicities that I can't even begin to capture. It's so odd as a physician seeing things happen that they sort of defy logic. On the other side of the coin, having a patient hang on for so long, waiting for a brother or a sister or a loved one who's across the world, flying in just to see them, have them arrive, and minutes after arriving into their hospital room, the patient passes away. And to me, it's an indicator, if you were to statistically look at this, it would be far beyond the likelihood of this being chance. And so for me, it's enough evidence that there's something more at play. There's something more going on. And we haven't even begun to talk about the stories that I hear of patients who do survive clinical death and the afterlife. So for me, it's a factual matter of the afterlife. And I find it helpful to tell patients life goes on. Life does, in fact, go on. And I feel pretty comfortable saying that because of what I've seen.
Right. Let's talk about the things that you have seen. Now, you talk about the timing often of death. And this is true in my family. You know, our tradition is we sit with the person who's dying like 24/7. Somebody's with them. And then the moment we go, oh, it's not going to be for a while. We're going to go have something to eat. We're exhausted, go get something to drink. That's when they pass. And the renowned psychic Echo Bodine, I had seen her speak here in Kansas City one time, and she said that, it's such a personal journey that we take when we die and when we're born to something that we do on our own. And sometimes it takes a bit of momentum to get us out of our body. And that momentum is kind of, not to put too fine on a point of it, but if you're trying to go to the bathroom and somebody's standing right outside the door, and sometimes you just need a moment to gather yourself, gather your forces before being able to make that transition. And then waiting, we also hear people waiting for a loved one to get there who is trying to get there from a distance. So yeah, these things, when we think that the person who is dying is not aware of anything, they truly are, aren't they? Right.
They
So
are.
you've seen some amazing things besides this timing issue, but like, what is the most profound experience that you have seen?
Well, there's several that come to mind, but really the most profound experiences of death have been where deep transformation has occurred in me as well as the patient. And there's a story that I share in my book, Love Does Not Know Death, that talks about a very young woman. She is in her 20s and she has severe kyphosis. Basically, her spine is doubled inward and her face is basically down all the time and her chest is caved in. So because of that, she gets pneumonias a lot. And I mean, in the olden days, we probably would have used the term hunchback, but that's sort of what she had. And she came in because of pneumonia and got sepsis, septic shock. The pneumonia was pretty bad. She was genuinely very, very loving. She could barely breathe when she came in. And yet, despite that, she smiled at me. She smiled at the nurses. She had a presence about her that was just angelic. And she was very peaceful. But outwardly, I could see that she was having difficulty breathing. Her blood pressure was low. Her heart was fast. She had a fever, everything indicating that she was going into sepsis. And let me give a little context. Prior to her coming in, I had been dealing with a surgical colleague who was very abrasive, and we would often get into some conflict because he would want things his way or the highway, and there was no collaboration with him. And as an intensivist, as an ICU doctor, anyone that comes into ICU, I take charge of them and I make sure we provide the best care. But we do have specialists and surgeons and consultants who want things done their way, and he was one of them. And it was hard to deal with that kind of mentality. And I found myself judging him. And now, in the context of that happening, I meet Claire. That was the name I'm giving her. Something interesting happened with her. And I don't know where it came from and what about being with her created a shift in me. But it was almost like I had a sense that who she was so much bigger than this tiny, petite, crippled body that she was in. And it was almost as if she was inviting me to see the grandeur of who she was, like this powerful, loving, radiant presence of light that was this beautiful being, but in a tiny, tiny body that was bent over in bed. Several days into her hospital stay, I overheard a code blue alarm. And code blue in the hospital means someone's heart has stopped. And as the ICU physician, my job is to respond to all the code blues. So I responded. And when I got to the room, I realized it was Claire's room. And I thought, oh my God, no, what did we do wrong? I immediately went to, what mistake did I make? What did we miss that we couldn't afford to miss? And I went to the foot of the bed and just started running the code. We had respiratory therapists, nurses, people were doing chest compressions actually one-handed from underneath because her chest was bent over, which is very hard to do.
Yes.
And then I had to get a breathing tube through her mouth to breathe, to hook her up to life support. And doing that while your body is bent, the whole thing was very, very challenging. We got her heart back very briefly and then lost it again. And then her heart stopped. And in my mind, suddenly got that, okay, she's leaving us. She's leaving us now. And I closed my eyes and I asked for a moment of silence from all the nurses and the staff. And in that moment of silence, I could see her eyes in my mind's eye, just these brilliant, brilliant eyes and just a radiant smile. And I saw her as this endless expanse of white light, just without end, just endless expanse. And I could feel that that was me too. And it's almost like I could see my own nature reflected in her. And there was this moment where my eyes were closed and I kind of felt like her and me were merging and we were this huge, endless sea of light and love. And that was who we really are, not the bodies that we happen to have in this moment. And I said thank you to everyone, and people started cleaning. I walked out and I had to do the really tough conversation of calling her mom to let her mom know that her daughter had died. And so I was walking to my office to make that tough conversation. And there's a long hallway between the ICU and my office. I was walking down the hallway, and out of the corner of my eye, I see something shimmer. And I look towards it, and the shimmer sort of turns into this shape of a really tall being, maybe 8 foot. I'm 5'10, 5'11. This is like a 2 feet above me. And this beautiful woman in a long regal dress shows up in front of me, and I see her eyes, and I recognize those are Claire's eyes. And I recognize this as Claire. And she didn't say anything to me verbally, but the thought, feeling that I got from her was, thank you for seeing me as I am. And then she disappeared. And I was alone in the hallway, and I felt this, like there's this wave of love come over me, and gratitude for her for giving me the opportunity to see myself. And I went into the office and called her mom, and I am floored by the grace that some families have. Her mother just said, thank you. Thank you. And she said she knew her daughter was going to go and that she gave herself over to that fate. And it was one of the most touching conversations I had, because I felt like her mom also saw me as I really was, with her gratitude and her expression. And in the days that came, I realized I could then see other people in the same way. That surgeon who came up to me, I started to see him as this endless expanse of light. And all of his angry behavior, it was almost like the teeniest of ripples on the surface of a vast, still ocean. And it made me realize this man, what he's saying and his behavior has nothing to do with the essence of who he is. Who he really is that vast ocean of light. And that's who I am. And I realized it totally healed my relationship with him. And for that, I'm always forever grateful to Claire.
Amazing. That had to have been very, very transformative. Prior to that experience, had you had any other profound experiences, or was that the first?
I've had some profound experiences alone in meditation, but that was my first one with a patient that completely shifted my view of myself and how I relate to others in the hospital.
Well, I can imagine that would profoundly shift the way that you see anything, too, just like with the surgeon. I mean,
Right.
you can't see anything the same way ever again after something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I realized that when you heal one part of your life, in the case of my own self-doubt as a physician, whether I did the right thing by Claire, caring for her, when you heal one aspect, it will transfer to others.
Yeah.
It's the holographic nature of healing, as I am learning. And I realized in what happened with Claire, my relationship with this surgeon healed. Now, I don't know what it was like on his end, but on my end, the judgment, the blame, the anger just vanished.
I thought we were talking before I hit record about QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique, Dolores Cannon's work that she made famous. And I find this in QHHT sessions as well. And I'm a Reiki master as well. I'm a healer, but just a different type of healer than you. But I find that, I don't remember the term that you had for it, but when we make this shift within ourselves, this energetic shift, then it does radiate to the people around us. You cannot have that shift, that profound shift within you, and not have it affect all of your relationships.
That's right.
Oh,
How fortuitous you named your podcast Radiate Wellness.
there's a reason
Yeah.
for it. Because what we radiate shows, and what we radiate
Yeah.
surrounds us, reflects around us. I wish more of the medical community would see these things and have these revelations. I think
Yeah.
healing so much more profound and perhaps even more lasting. We can have some lasting relief, but we want to have the permanent healing. But that's a topic for another day. Now, on this show, I've had many people to talk about their near-death experiences. I'm sure you've heard of Raymond Moody, Dr. Raymond Moody.
Yeah. Yes. Very famous.
He's become something of a friend after he appeared on the show. And he's just a lovely, lovely person. The near-death experience is fascinating. So I know you've seen a lot of death, but what about near-death? experiences. Have you been touched by that?
Yes, two cases. One case was, for me, it was amazing. But since then, I've reviewed a lot of the NDE near death experience literature and realized, no, these are all classic cases. The one case was of a man who was post cardiac arrest. He had had a heart attack and underwent heart surgery. And in the days after heart surgery, his heart had stopped again. And we resuscitated him. And the time it took to resuscitate him was about 30 minutes. And just to put things into context, most of us can only hold our breath for about a minute or two. If you hold your breath more than about 5 minutes, you can start to do brain damage. And an MRI scan will actually pick up neurons that die of lack of oxygen after the 5 minute mark. So here's someone who ostensibly went 30 minutes without oxygen. And so even though we got him back, I was already mentally preparing, okay, I'm going to have to emotionally set expectations to the family that even though his heart is back, his brain may not be the same because of the damage done from lack of oxygen. And, 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what happens. When someone has a cardiac arrest and they don't get return of spontaneous circulation, which is the term that we use, they often will either be comatose or they'll never wake up again, or they can't talk, or they don't understand, they can't swallow, like terrible, terrible things that happen with brain damage. So I was mentally preparing myself to have this conversation, only to have the patient start, pointing at his breathing tube saying he wants it out and following commands and showing signs. And I was just floored, like, okay, clearly he has no brain damage. This is great. We got the breathing tube out many hours later. And he started to tell me these stories of, oh, I saw my father, my mother, some aunts and uncles, relatives that had passed on. And I don't remember the details, but I recall him telling me that it was a very busy world. Like there was a lot of people there,
Yes.
a lot of guides, I imagine. And the other thing that I was struck by was just this felt sense on his part of being loved and cared for, not by anyone in particular, but by life itself, just all of life, just giving him this eternal hug. And what a feeling to know that you're loved endlessly. It's just amazing. And it changed him and his relationship with his family. The other case was of a woman who underwent general anesthesia after having surgery. And she also had her heart stop very briefly and was above her body and witnessed the very specific things that the nurse did, pulling these blue surgical towels over and then looking at what the monitor shared. And she was not a medical person. And the things that she was describing, I would find it very hard for someone to make up without medical background. And when she told me of her experiences, 100% believed her because of her background. And these cases are, I found out later on, are classic NDE cases, more or less. But it also taught me something really important, which is this idea in Western medicine. The Western medical model would argue that consciousness is a byproduct of the firing of neurons. And in my experience, that's not the case. In my experience, consciousness or awareness exists independent of the physical body and independent of the physical brain. The brain maybe can be like a tuner of sorts of that consciousness. But one thing's for sure, and I'm not an expert in that field in any way, but I do know from my experience, I am 100% convinced that awareness and consciousness absolutely can and does exist independent of the physical body. And that is far closer to the nature of who we really are than the physical body.
I love that science and medicine is catching up with these ideas because I teach a class, Love Never Dies, and we know that energy cannot be destroyed and new energy cannot be created. So where does that energy, even if we're talking about perhaps scientifically or something we can measure the electrical impulses in the body, what happens with that? It goes on. It goes on. There have been so many cases of documented near-death experiences. It's been amazing. It was Dr. Moody who also co-wrote the book Shared Death Experiences. Have you ever heard of this?
I hadn't until very recently. And I'm learning now that, yeah, we can have shared death experiences. And I know several physicians, not personally, but I have heard of them being absolutely transformed by the death of their patients and share in the experience of the death of their patient. And I guess in a sense, maybe that partly is what happened with me and Claire. But I think one thing I do know for sure, anyone who legitimately, courageously faces death comes out of it transformed. And if there's anything that I wish readers could take out of the book is that death need not be feared. And if it is embraced wholeheartedly with courage, meaning from the heart, we can awaken to the nature of who we really are. The whole game is a spiritual game of awakening. And I think facing death is part of that awakening.
It is a huge part of that awakening. So many people who come back from near-death experiences are profoundly changed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Eben Alexander.
Yes, the neurosurgeon. I don't know him personally, but I know his story very well, and I read his book. It's fantastic.
He's a
I'm
lovely person.
very grateful that doctors like him are coming out. I do see a shift happening in medicine. It's slow, but it's happening. There's enough physicians coming out now and sharing these alternate perspectives.
So, yes, anything that you can do in your realm to get these stories out there and this research and the literature out there, I think is going to make us all so much better in the long run. I have friends who are death doulas or training to be death doulas to guide people through this very natural process. I know you're a Dolores Cannon fan. Have you read her book, Between Death and Life?
I have. Yeah, that was one of the first books I read. Such a beautiful book. Yes. Yeah. And all the work that she does is so, so inspiring. For me, one of the things that it brings me a lot of comfort when I know that the death of this physical body is not going to be the end of me. And the death of my loved one, my wife, my mother, my family, that not only is their physical death not the end, but communication does in fact continue. Now, it may not be the same way that we're used to, where, two bodies are talking to each other, but it's communication nevertheless. I've had my father passed away about 5, 6 years ago, and gosh, I have become so much more aware of the dream realm since then and the ability to communicate with him regularly through that. And I think eventually, here are my two hopes and wishes for medicine, for Western medicine. One is that we acknowledge that we are spiritual beings, that awareness is fundamental, that consciousness is fundamental to our being, the body is secondary. And the second thing is that we recognize that true healing is spiritual awakening. Those two words are synonymous for me because healing happens when we remember our wholeness. And this is very important because a lot of Western medicine operates under the assumption that something is broken with you and it'll take a pharmaceutical agent, a surgical treatment, or some procedure to repair or fix that broken thing. The whole model is backward. And in the spiritual model of awakening, at least for many Eastern traditions, argues that you're already whole. You just forgot that you were. And so the journey is the remembrance of the wholeness that's always been there.
That is a beautiful, beautiful way to look at it and to remember it. Because really I call it a meat suit. The meat suit that we wear is just the vehicle. It's not who we are, right? It's not the personality. It's not the name. It's not the credentials. It's not the anything. It's who we are is who Claire is, that big light being who is just radiant. And that is truly our true nature. So I'm glad that y'all are catching up with this. How
We're almost there. Maybe another 100 years or so. Hopefully sooner.
Well, we've got people on the inside like you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? What are your colleagues thinking of this? That was a bold move, I have to say, to come out and write this book. What have you said?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't talk to a lot of my colleagues about this. For those who are open to it, we have conversations, and I've met several physicians that are open to this, and it's lovely to be able to share that. But in general, this is not something that is talked about in the medical field. It's sort of discouraged, or maybe it's briefly acknowledged, but there's no interest in diving deeper because there's a stigma attached to it, or you're seen as woo-woo or cuckoo or any other two-syllabled words. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, but I felt so strongly to write this book. My death journal had started to accumulate so many stories that were beyond belief and truly healing. I know because I've healed so much from experiencing them that if I could just publish some of these stories so others know, so maybe other patients and other families who are facing death can have some modicum of comfort and hope about what life really is about, then I should do it. And if it means my reputation is at stake, so be it. If it means that a family or two will be healed from it.
I think Dr. Alexander had the same realization. It's like, I can't keep this to myself. Yes, I could be ostracized. I could lose my job, but the truth is way too important and I can't keep it to myself. Many near-death experiencers also have this compulsion. I'm thinking of David Ditchfield, who actually was the very first author that Gavin sent me, our mutual publicist, to interview. David
Wow.
had a very well-known, well-documented near-death experience after being drugged underneath a train in England.
Wow.
It was an incredible, horrific accident. And they changed all of the safety laws for trains and public transportation after that in England. But after his near death experience, he came out of it compelled to paint his experience,
Wow.
the beings that he had seen there, and to write a symphony. He had never written music before. He maybe knew 3 chords on the guitar. He said he had dabbled a little bit in graphic arts, but he'd never painted. And he painted these big, huge paintings of the beings that he saw on the other side. He wrote an entire symphony with no training. I'm thinking of Susan Walter, who's also been on this podcast. She's here in Kansas City and is a friend. After her near-death experiences, she was seeing angels. As she grew up, she was a child when this happened. But when she grew up, her angels said, "Now you see us, you have to paint us." She didn't paint, but she came out of this with this compulsion needing to experience it. Dr. Alexander, he came out of his near-death experience. He tried to go back to medicine, knew that what he really needed to do was talk about this, and
Yeah.
started a foundation to spread the word, recreate the music he heard on the other side, that these are so profound to the people who experience these events that they have to talk about it.
Yeah. I feel that I see what you're saying because I feel the same way too. The book I had to write it. Even if no one bought it, I had to write it. If it meant just one person could read it and it touched someone. And the interesting thing, I've never had an NDE in that sense myself, but having been around death so much, I don't know, maybe some part of it rubbed off on me. But what it has done for me is I contemplate my death often. And what it does is it brings me to a place of appreciating what really matters. The pettiness of life falls away, the small things, chasing after money and possessions and fame and all the things that people tend to get wrapped up inside of, it's all just washed away. And really this journey of awakening to my nature, to the nature of love, to reality, to truth, that's the only thing I care about now. So in that sense, there's a strong compulsion in that way as other NDEers.
Yes, no, absolutely, because you have a different perspective on this in seeing what happens with your patients. And we hear many times people on their deathbed, they'll reach out and they'll want to talk to somebody who's not there physically, right? Oh, mom is here. My
Yeah.
sister is here. Steve Jobs on his deathbed, he very famously said, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." Because of what he was experiencing through that threshold. And then, of course, Dolores's book, Between Death and Life, talks about it's just as easy as getting up from one room and you go to the other room. And I'm sure it's
Yeah.
beautiful. But yeah, from your perspective, you've got the medical back. As you said before, for a long time, people thought, oh, these near death experiences, they're all the same because it's just the process of the brain shutting down. No,
Mhm.
no.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, a lot of the cases that I've read about and experienced firsthand, these are patients, and for people who are medical and listening to this, these are patients who have had electrographic tests done, EEGs done that measure the brain activity essentially. And it's zero, it's undetectable. You can elicit the same sort of thing with deep general anesthesia where the brain's just not functioning. It takes a highly, highly active occipital lobe, a visual cortex, to create an experience of a colorful, hyper real world. I mean, Dr. Alexander talks about this. The colors are so vivid and radiant, the sounds, a brain to produce and perceive that kind of sensory overload would be lighting up in all sorts of ways. And we don't see that on the tests of people who have experienced clinical death. So then it makes me wonder, okay, is the brain really producing consciousness or is there something else going on here? So for me, it's like the debate is over. It'll take a while for, I think, others to catch up. But for me, the debate's over. I think consciousness is not a byproduct of neurons firing.
Right. So, okay. So, Adam, this begs the question then, what is consciousness to your mind?
Well, there's some deep work that we can go into it. I think that there is consciousness. We could dive into this consciousness and awareness. I think that there's a distinction there, and I would posit that there's a distinction. But fundamentally, I would say consciousness is the ground of being. I would say consciousness exists a priori to the phenomenal world to all form. And that life, our body, our house, the people, all the forms all around us, they exist inside and within the space of consciousness. We typically, and this is again my opinion and experience, I think we typically assume consciousness, one, is a byproduct of the brain, and that consciousness is observing an external world that's objective and outside of us. And what I would offer is that consciousness is all that is. Consciousness is the ground of reality, is being, and all experiences reside and occur and arise in the field of consciousness.
So what you said there is all that is. That's God
Yeah.
for so
Yeah.
many people.
That word is very loaded, but I would say the same thing. It is. Yeah. God is. God is the ground of being. God is all that is and the core of reality.
Right. But Jesus said that, all of us are God. The kingdom of heaven is within.
Yes.
Now, this is not a religious podcast. I'm not a religious person at all. Huge Jesus fan and huge God fan.
Yeah. I love that. I am too. Very much so.
Wonderful. So before you started experiencing death and really pondering it and looking at it the way that you do now, what was your experience? Like, did you have religion? Did you have any kind of faith or any inkling that this was the truth?
Yeah. My mother was raised Catholic and my father was raised Muslim. So I was raised in an interesting household, mostly a Judeo Christian household that shared the same sort of bearded white fellow up in the clouds that pointed a finger at you if you did something wrong. But when I was a teenager, I felt like a religion of sacrifice and suffering doesn't explain everything. For me, it didn't. And I wanted something more. So I started to explore Tibetan Buddhism very, very deeply. Studied with a Tibetan Buddhist master and learned the basics of meditation at a monastery for some time. I studied Advaita Vedanta, which is a Hindu non-dual school. And I started to really explore non-dualism, just the concept of non-dualism. And that sort of journey led me to discover A Course in Miracles, which in many ways combined my earlier childhood with my current understanding. It's often called the Christian Vedanta, but essentially it is a non-dual text. Non-dual meaning what it stipulates is God is the only reality that is, and everything else is a dreamlike illusion. And we are waking up from the dream of separation and remembering our oneness with God, with Source. And the terms it uses are largely Christian, but the metaphysics are non-dual, which resonate quite a bit for me. I will say, though, that it's not necessary for people to believe what I believe or to follow the same path, because all paths deep in their mystic core will bring us back to that sense of oneness and that sense of unity. And if there is one fundamental truth, as cliche as it might be these days, it's the truth of love. And love will remind us at every step of the way that we are one with each other and we are one with Source itself.
Well, in QHHT sessions, when people are speaking with their higher self, their subconscious, nearly every session, the subconscious, that kind of collective oversoul, always says the only thing there is love. Everything is love. The Beatles had it right. Everything is love. Love is all there is. And when people in that state experience, I think you referenced this earlier, that when you're in that divine love, that you feel like you're being hugged from all angles at once, that's profound.
Yeah. Yeah. It changes you. I think about what it does just psychologically to a child when it knows it is loved by its parents versus a child that it's not sure that it's loved. There's a sense of psychological fear. Your whole trajectory of adulthood is completely changed. And now you extrapolate that same phenomenon to the soul level, to the mind level. What does it do to a soul to know unequivocally that it is loved unconditionally? You don't have to do something or believe something or say something or profess something to be loved. You just are loved always and forever. It totally changes things as a soul, as a being for me. And I would say that that's a very important message to take home.
It is too. And this is why I'm not religious, actually. So I can't be on board with anyone who says, or any group that says, you have to jump through all these hoops in order for God to love you, that if you don't do these things, you're not going to be accepted. No.
Mm.
No. Right?
That would be conditional. Yeah.
Very conditional. Mm. Well, this seems like it has really changed you. And you talked about children a moment ago. You've got children, yes?
I don't actually know.
Oh, oh,
No, I'm married, but we don't have kids.
right. Because I was wondering how that might change how you approach certain topics with them, right?
Yeah, if I had children, what I've noticed, obviously, there are many children in my life from cousins and different extended family.
Right.
I've noticed that children are far more observant than we give them credit for. F- far more intelligent than we think they are. And they catch on to things quickly. And they're very empathic and very, very intuitive. In some ways, children, maybe because they don't have the filtering and the indoctrination from society, they trust the intuitive knowledge more than the logical knowledge. And things will come to them and they'll just know it to be true, or they'll know that someone's maybe not telling the truth. I've noticed that about really young children. And so I think children know love. They know it. It's obvious. It's so obvious to them. They don't need to be convinced that they're loved and cared for. So I'd probably speak to them about God as their home, and God is that which loves you unconditionally. And you don't have to do anything or say anything or behave in any particular way. God will always love you. And that does something to a child's psyche to know that.
So true. I think so too. Very profound. So there's been a lot of work on the near death experience. I just read an article today. I want to say New York Times, maybe, that science is now understanding death more. So these are topics we're aware of and it's been written about, researched on. What makes your book about it different?
The near death experience literature needs to keep growing and the anecdotes need to keep building. I think we need a critical mass of that to begin to shift the Western mindset, the Western medical mindset. But I would say fundamentally, my book is not about convincing anyone regarding the reality of the afterlife. That's sort of a pleasant byproduct of the stories that I share in the book. But really, I think the fundamental message in my book is use the frightening aspect of death, the fear that arises when either you are facing death or your loved one, use that and embrace it as part of your path to spiritual awakening. Use it to forgive. And that's probably the single most important message is the message of forgiveness. When I see patients who are facing death and their family members come in, invariably, I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but invariably, there are family members that haven't talked to each other for years because of some past hurt or grievance or something. And it's amazing what a death in the family will do to bring disparate members of the family together. They would never have chosen to see each other again if it weren't for this person dying. And so it will bring up these old wounds and these scars. And when that happens, we have two choices. We can either avoid it, repress it, suppress it, attack and blame again, and just rehash the pain all over again. Or we can decide this time is going to be different. I am going to forgive. And I'm going to say something. I've had some people sort of criticize this word. When I say forgiveness, I don't mean you condone the behaviors of people who have hurt you. I don't mean that you condone abusive behavior or an abusive relationship. Sometimes love means you don't talk to someone again, or you don't put yourself in a situation where you can be harmed. And that's loving because you're doing it for yourself. When I talk about forgiveness, I mean forgiveness where you go to the core of that person and you can see that underneath all the pain and the trauma and the upbringing and the indoctrination is an innocent person, is innocence. Because if we're all one and we're all one with Source, with God, that's love there. That's innocence there. So cut through the illusion of an arrogant, angry, abusive person. Go to the core of who they are. And the last thing I'll say about forgiveness and why it's so important is forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. You're not forgiving the person because you believe they didn't actually do anything wrong. No, you're forgiving that person because you're unburdening yourself from the prison of judgment. It is so painful to hold on to judgment. And we don't realize because we start to get numb to it, but it's a heavy, heavy burden. And when you forgive someone, you can just go of the past. You can give yourself the freedom to breathe again and be free from having to blame and to judge. You'll feel so much freer. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that my book offers is it's an invitation to forgive. It's an invitation to heal in the face of death.
Which is remarkable for someone, again, in your position as a physician to advocate healing via forgiveness rather than pharmaceuticals or treatments or surgery, et cetera, et cetera. Just recognizing the whole person in this. No, you're absolutely right. Forgiveness does not mean, oh, what you did is not important. Come over for dinner every Sunday. No, forgiveness is that I am no longer going to carry the burden of the pain that I've been feeling from it.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Liberating. Very, very liberating. Wow, this is a beautiful topic. I just absolutely love it. So where can we find your book?
It's on Amazon. You can go to lovedoesnotknowdeath.com, and I have a couple of links to the US and UK Amazon pages and a Kindle version. I'm working on an audiobook at the moment, but I don't think it'll be released till maybe January or February. And then if you're interested in these kind of stories, I've made a commitment to myself to really honor the stories of my patients as they arise instead of accumulating it in a journal that gathers dust. And I started a Substack called Adventures in Kindness. And you can just Google my name, Adam Rizvi, Substack, Adventures in Kindness. And I recommend you subscribe. It's free and you'll get access to, I'll try to do an article once a month and just share the lessons I learn in the hospital.
That's wonderful. Now, you also have a podcast.
I do.
So,
Yes. The podcast is called Letters to the Sky. It's a little bit different. It's with my dear friend, Stephen Downs. Him and I both practice non-dual forms of spirituality. He's much more in the Buddhist side of things, but we come together and we explore the wisdom in all traditions. We've done episodes on Sufism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, mysticism, shamanism, and the core message invariably is oneness and is love. And we talk about our personal experiences, our personal spiritual practice, and we just share what we learn with others. And we have occasional guests that come on as well, too.
Oh, yeah. That's right up my alley. Fantastic. Is there anything we've not discussed, anything we haven't gone over that you think is important to know about your work?
Well, I've really enjoyed this. Has been such one of the most gratifying interviews I've had. And I think it's gratifying because I was able to share what I think is the most important takeaway from the book.
Yeah.
Life is so precious. It's so, so precious. And when someone's facing death, don't let that opportunity slip away. Embrace it wholeheartedly. Forgive what needs to be forgiven. Love like your life depends on it because life is too short to do otherwise.
It's amazing. If I could add one more thing, death is not this big tragedy. Yes, there are tragic circumstances, but death is an adventure. It's an opportunity. It's something that is inevitable. It's just as important as birth is. I will add just a couple of
Yeah, please do.
little stories. My dear friend Caitlin was living in Scotland at the end of her life, and she was only 44 years old and had been through cancer 4 times. And we all knew it was the end, but she was not going to come home to the United States because the healthcare system is so much better in Scotland. Anyway, I was waiting for news from her dad. She came to me. I knew that she had passed because she came to me and she says, "Well, I broke up with my body." What?
Wow.
Once I realized I could, it was ridiculously easy to do so. And I thought that was
Wow.
the perfect view of death. I just broke up with my body.
I
So
love that.
that, right? And then
Yeah.
when my dad passed 3 years ago, I had just arrived at the airport after his passing. It was unexpected. And he came to me and he was in this big plastic bag, clear plastic bag. And he was pushing against this bag. And then he says, "Now I broke free." He got out of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think those are some really good examples of what it's like for the person that is dying. You just break up with your body, you get out of that meat suit, and you go on about your business.
I love the symbolism in that too. Fantastic.
That was a great, great thing. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, Adam.
Oh, thank you.
One of my favorite topics actually is death and near-death experience. And
Yeah.
you bring so much light to it.
Thank you, Christy. It's been a joy being on your show.
Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?